Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the White Belt MMA podcast. And it's an absolute pleasure to have on the show UFC featherweight Vince Morales. My man, how you doing?
Doing good, man. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. So, man, like I was telling you off camera, man, like, I really appreciate you giving me the time of day, random 24-year-old kid doing this podcast, following his dreams. And, I just love talking to people that, with the same mindset of saying they're following their dreams. And for you, like, I mean, you're in the UFC, you're in the top stage. So, as someone that's trying to follow their dreams and trying to make it big in their field, I want to know how you made it big in your field. So, how'd you get started in combat sports, and we'll go from there.
So, actually, for me, I still feel like I'm barely scratching the surface of what I really want to accomplish in doing this. Really, I started training MMA when I was 22 or 23. I think 23. I had my first amateur MMA fight. But basically, the main reason I got into it was I just missed competing and wrestling back in high school. And from where I'm from Ontario, Oregon. It's a little town. We got like a little over 12,000 people there. So, and there's not a lot to really do to keep you occupied. So I kind of stumbled onto an MMA gym and some YouTube videos on some training, and finally just kind of dove into that and really fell in love with it ever since. And I don't know, I've kind of always had a feeling, maybe just because of how I am and how I dedicate to the things I enjoy doing, that eventually I'd be competing against some of the better guys in the world. Thankfully, that's brought me here to the UFC, and really just trying to make the most of that opportunity. Really, that's what led me to moving here in Vegas, actually.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And then, like, I know you said, so you kind of stumbled on an MMA gym, but like, early on in your childhood, and like, you said you did wrestling and everything like that. Did you have an idea what you wanted to do? Cause I know some people, right, when they're growing up, right, they see their sports, like, football, whatever. They're like, oh, I want to be an NFL player. Or, some people want to go down like the college route, be like, oh, I want to go and, be someone in the business world. So for you, like growing up, like what you wanted to be, like originally, like, did you have an idea, or was it one of those like, hey man, I'm just going with the flow?
Dude, honestly, I wanted to be like, I had no way to follow the path, but my childhood dream was like an astronaut. I really wanted to do something kind of crazy like that. And then I found wrestling through my math teacher as a freshman in high school. And yeah, he came up to me after class one day and he was just asking me if I'd considered wrestling. I was like, well, not at all. He's like, well, come out. I think you'd like it. I think you'd have a good time. And that led me to losing every single match my freshman year. And then, so I had a rough start, and eventually it just kind of, it progressed. I got better. If I like something, I end up trying to figure it out. And then, each year I tended to jump up a little bit. And by the time I was a senior, I actually took first state tournament. So for me, that's my Cinderella story for coming around to victory. And from there, I didn't really know what I wanted to be doing. All I knew is that I really wanted to keep competing. When I was younger, I thought being a professional athlete would be the best, just because I'd always enjoyed staying active and working out and everything. So yeah, part of me had always wanted it, and yeah, I just ended up being kind of good at MMA. So thankfully, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, and tell us a story about that. Like, so it's like, by stumbling onto the MMA gym, was like, did you have someone that like was doing it, and then he was just there, like he or she was like, yo, come to the gym? Or is one of those that, just by faith, you were walking and then you're like, you know what? Let me go back to my wrestling days and go right into competing and see what I can do against these guys.
That's kind of closer to how it was, really. I knew one guy that I went to school with who wrestled. I think we were a few weight classes apart, but he was doing MMA with the guy named Rick Reyna over in Ontario. And I had asked him a couple times about it, and I think he had stopped training with him for whatever reason. And then I had just heard through the grapevine, because it's a fairly small community. So I ended up hearing that he was picking up classes again and starting to train again. And I was like, well, I got to go get in there. So I went in there one day after work. I was selling cars back then, and just kind of told him, I was like, hey, I'd really like to start coming and training. And like, I was like, I have wrestling, so I got a little bit of competitive background, but I don't know anything about it, and I'd like to learn. So he's like, yeah, sure, come in. So He had class like a couple times a week, and eventually I fizzled down to like one time a week or so. And I ended up training with like a boxer that I had met from town, just kind of getting my feet wet in that a little bit. And just for whatever reason, I'd always found somehow to keep training, even if there wasn't anything available. So I think I just, my dedication to it kind of just showed in that sense. And then eventually I moved over to Nampa, Idaho, which was about an hour away or so, and found an MMA gym, and it just progressed. And ever since, it's kind of, something's always led to another in that same area. So, and I think that shows more so just what it meant to me.
Yeah, definitely. And then, like you said, it's like you had wrestling experience, beforehand. So like, that first sparring session, obviously like wrestling and then just, putting everything together into MMA. So like, how was your first couple sparring sessions? Especially I know that we have a couple fans that like, watch the podcast and then they like the training and everything like that. And we always joke around where I was just like, yeah, man, like the first time you get into like a sparring situation, it's a whole different ordeal. Cause like I trained jujitsu. And then I remember like the first time I got into like a sparring, like MMA situation, it just hit me like a Mack truck. I'm over here. I'm like, okay, I can't be just chilling on half guard trying to see what I can do from here. So for you, like, how was that? Cause I know, wrestling and MMA, like I said, the same thing, two different ball games.
Yeah, absolutely. It was for me, it felt a little freeing, honestly. Like I'd always kind of felt that in wrestling, like even as a decent wrestler, I wasn't like the best trying to pin somebody or hold anybody down. I kind of took my wrestling as a fighter. Like I take somebody down and let them up, take them down, let them up. And that's just because I felt better there, and they'd break before I'd break. So the business was breaking people. And so finally, when I got into some MMA sparring, everything, I could just let go a little bit. I ended up standing up most of the time, and then every now and then throwing in a takedown. And yeah, like it was just freeing. I remember after I got done, I was like, that feels better. Like that's how things should feel a little bit. The first few times getting hit was a little weird. Like end up pounding your gloves together, like, okay, come on, let's go. We're trying to, this is real. So for me, I loved it. It was refreshing.
That's awesome. And then like, as you keep on training, and like you said, it's like, you're always doing something, right? So it's like, eventually, like it got to the point that you're like, okay, well, let me get a couple fights under my belt. So, tell us a little bit about that. So it's like, how did you stumble onto your first amateur fight? And yeah, tell us a little bit about the nerves. Cause I'm assuming the nerves are on an all-time high, especially going into, like you're fighting another human being.
Yeah. It's very, very, it was interesting. So I ended up getting the fight kind of on accident. So a promoter had hit up Rick Reyna, the one of the guys I was training with, about his old fighter. And he's like, well, I haven't been training with the guy anymore, but I do have this guy who's been training. I think I've been training maybe 2 or 3 months or something like that. And they were like, okay, cool. Well, we got an opening at 155 is what I debuted at as an amateur, just because I didn't like cutting weight. I didn't cut weight in high school very much, so I wasn't about to start. And the nerves, everything was like eerily similar to wrestling. And it still is like fight day nerves. There's kind of nothing really like it. I always end up going through the thought process of, why do I do this to myself? And then thankfully all that stuff goes away once you get in there and it's time to compete. Like I can imagine what that would still be like if that was there. It was very, very interesting. It was a lot to take in. It was a tiny venue, packed house though. A bunch of my coworkers had actually bought a table there and came and supported, and I could literally almost reach over the cage and like to high five them because they were so close. It was very tight. And yeah, I ended up fighting a guy who had a little bit of experience. He was a tough guy. I think he was like 35. I was like 22. So I was like, okay, I'm fighting a grown man here. And I just went out there and my whole mindset was get him before he gets me. And I hurt him with a punch. I dropped him. He almost armbarred me. I slammed him. And we just went kind of back and forth in that sense. And before even really training any amount of jiu-jitsu, I ended up winning that fight by an armbar, which was interesting. I was just kind of copying stuff that I'd seen on TV and everything. I'm like, I think this feels right. And yeah, ended up catching that, which was kind of cool. Yeah, and it's like I said, those nerves, they haven't gone away. I get those every single time. And it's kind of, for me, it's fun. I embrace them. Like it makes me realize how important what it is that I'm doing is to myself. So
Yeah,
it's
and like
interesting.
for you, like did you always have that type of mindset of like embracing the nerves, or did you? It's one of those things that you kind of had to get better at it, like as times went on, because like you know, for me, it's just like going into jiu-jitsu competition, nerves on an all-time high. So I can only imagine for you. And then it's like for you, was it just like the matter of like just the more fights you had, the more those nerves got better, or?
Now that I think the nerves stay exactly the same. It's
Mhm.
how I choose to approach them is
Mhm.
the only thing that's changed. I believe at first it was always dread. There was always dread, and I just couldn't shake them. And then I ended up switching that to like instead of trying to avoid those things because they're always going to be there, I just try to grab hold of them and act like that's some sort of support for me now. I think mentally I go into fights and everything. I think have a fairly healthy approach for it, and embracing them is the best way that I can handle it. I end up makes me feel good having all those nerves now instead of existential dread where I don't know what to do with them. If that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, yeah, definitely. So yeah, man. So as we keep going on a long career, and then it's like one thing that like I actually saw like when I was doing so perfect for you. It's like you're actually cousins with Ricky Simone. So it's like, how was that? So was he training MMA before you, or was it kind of around like the same time that like you guys kind of started training, and then like you guys kind of went up the ranks, and now both of you guys are in the UFC. So how was that?
Yeah, that's crazy. I think if I remember right, we didn't even really know we were both fighting until maybe my fourth amateur fight in his like ninth or something like that. I don't remember how exactly we found out. And I was like, I remember when I found out he was fighting, I was like, oh, that makes sense. He was kind of always a rugged. He was the tough cousin,
Hmm.
so it made sense when I thought about him fighting. Um, and well, he like came to my state tournament while I wrestled because that was over in Portland, and he's from Vancouver, so it was fairly close. So he ended up being there for that. So we both knew that we competed in wrestling. We both knew we were good. He's always been the better wrestler, but on paper it's me. No, no. Um, yeah, and then eventually we just found out that we were fighting. We're like, no way, we're cool. So I went over there and trained for a little bit. He's came down and trained a couple times. I wish we could have figured things out, been more professional about it earlier on and actually utilize each other because I think we're both great tools for each other. And I think talking to somebody in the family that kind of knows what we're going through and everything, it's game changing really. So
Hmm.
as of the last like, I don't know, 5 years or so since I became pro, we've gotten better at that.
Hmm.
Um, so he's actually coming down here pretty soon to be part of this current camp, thankfully. But
Yeah.
it must be something in the blood. I don't know what that is.
No, yeah, and like, does it make you like you said? It's like at first, like you said, it's like now you guys are better at utilizing each other, for training and everything like that. But like, does it just make it easier just knowing that you have like another, loved one in the family, just in the same profession? Because like, I don't know how your family is, but I know there's a couple families, right? That like, let's say someone went into MMA or fighting, right? Like it would have they would give you a little bit of a pushback. But for you, like, was it just easier that everyone just there like, hey, man, like you said, it's in the blood, so might
Yeah,
as well
yeah.
be in the profession. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if anybody really cared what we did.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, um, I always tell them, I'm like, dude, we're the normal ones. We're the ones in fighting in a cage. No, just kidding. But at times it does make it easier because we can kind of bounce things off each other.
yeah.
I think we're solid pillars of support just because we understand what's going on in the fight world and everything.
Mhm.
Um, it's been great. I don't know. We haven't had much pushback from the family or anything. Our whole family super supports everything we're doing, so it's very cool.
That's awesome, brother. So yeah, man. So as we keep going along in your career, like fast forward a couple more fights, you get a couple more wins under your belt, and then you get the call up from the UFC for the Contender Series. So how was that, man? Because like I said, I can only imagine, right? Like how we started at the beginning. It's like just from like start stumbling upon an MMA gym and then getting into the top essentially. So like just getting the call from the UFC. How was that? Like how did your team react? How did your loved ones react? And yeah.
That was pretty insane. I remember at the time I had immediate panic because I had actually just booked a flight to Korea to go meet my girlfriend's family for the first time. Uh, so there was a lot to take in at that moment, and I had a fight booked already, and I had just quit my job, and like I needed that next fight, which was like maybe a month out, and the contender fight was like 3 months out. And I remember having panic. I don't know how I could make it that far because I have no money and yada yada. There was everything. Yeah, that was a lot to take in. I haven't really thought about that much since really, but it's very nerve wracking. Finally, once we got everything situated, I ended up fighting even later than initially I was contacted for. Um, when did I fight? Was that August, July? Do you remember? July. Anyways, the contender fight, yeah, July. I remember it was pushed back a little bit, and we ended up getting there, and the whole thing was kind of it was a lot to take in. It was my first time even being in Vegas, I believe. I had reconnected with some family that lived in Vegas that came to the fight. The fight didn't work out as good as I had hoped, but I think it was a great fight. And it kind of showed a little bit of who I am. I'm still trying to show a little more of that going forward.
No, yeah, I mean, like just like you said, it's like you showed. I mean, because you dropped the guy even in, if I forgot what round it was, but it was, like I said, it's like you still put up like a good showing. So then it's that the UFC calls you back, you go all the way to China, and then like it seems like they don't have you fighting in the States, like I mean, besides like obviously put the pandemic, but they had you going to China, and then they had you going to Canada. So like. Just to talk about the one in Canada, and you're facing Ayman Sahabi, right? And then the last name Sahabi is like big in the sport of MMA, obviously with like his brothers being the coach for GSP. So how was that? Like, were there, like, I know we were speaking about nerves earlier, but were there any extra added nerves to that? Or it's one of those, like, you're just like, I believe in my game. I know I'm gonna get the result here.
Both really so after the contender fight, I had immediately wanted to get back to training. I was like, well, I got to fix that. I got to get back to training. So I ended up taking a fight for Bellator shortly after, and then performed well enough in that one that my manager hit me up and is like, the UFC needs you in a couple weeks. I'm like, couple weeks? Okay, where at? Cool, let's go. Like, sign me up. He's like, well, it's China. I'm like, okay, that's never been there. Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And then they said it's against Song Yadong. So I had seen him with his last fight, and then I ended up looking him up a little bit more. Come to find out that he's coming off of like 3 knockout of the night bonuses. So he's the up and coming China prospect. Great. That was pretty nerve wracking. And I remember my whole mindset in that fight was, don't get knocked out, do your thing. Don't get knocked out, do your thing. And I think don't get knocked out settled in a little more than doing my thing, because it took me a little bit to get going in that fight. And then fast forward a little bit later, I come over to Vegas. I start training at the PI. I start getting better workouts in. Start training with some better people here. That was really eye opening. And then boom, they fly me to Canada for Zahabi. And that fight, I remember thinking, man, it's GSP's coach's brother or something like that. I remember having the complex thought and trying to trace it, and I was like, that's a big fight, and it's in Canada. I'm like, oh man. I remember being a little nervous just for the situation, but it was fairly similar to the first fight. The nerves anyways. I'm like, okay, it's okay. I just got to do my thing and do it better, and then I'll be all right. And went out there, and he hit me with some good stuff in the first round. I think I hit him back a little bit better in the first round, and then I just couldn't get the engagements from him that I feel like I thrive in. Just couldn't get him to fight me as much as I was hoping. By the end, I felt like I did enough, so I was fairly confident. But at the back of my mind, it was in Canada, so I was a little skeptical with how the judges were going to see it. But I did think I landed the better stuff. But man, yeah, that was nerve wracking all the way through, from before the fight, in the fight, and waiting for the judge's decision. All that was pretty stressful.
Yeah, I mean, you get the result, right? And then like right after, you're speaking to media and everything like that. So like, how has it been dealing with like the large amount of media in the sport, especially being in the UFC, compared to like your earlier stuff? Obviously, it was just I'm not sure how much coverage those events had, but how does it feel just knowing that like you have people like me asking you for interviews, or just like after fights? It's just like people wanting your attention. So how does it feel? Yeah,
it's interesting. It's something I had a small taste of back when I was fighting over in Idaho. Even as an amateur, I had a few people interview me before fights and everything, and that was always strange. And then it just got escalated once the Contender Series came along, and then it escalated again once the UFC came along. It's been interesting. I thoroughly enjoy it though, because I actually end up, after talking to half you guys, I end up finding out more things about myself too that I haven't really thought about, like reflecting back on the Contender fight, then initially how it was and everything. Yeah, I enjoy it. It's all part of the process and all part of the journey, and again, I just try to embrace everything. At first, as nervous as I used to be for these things, now I end up getting more so excited for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, man. So like, fast forward to 2020, and like, this is a question that I like asking to all my fighters, especially during this time. It's like, how's the pandemic affected you in terms of training and all of that? I know you had a couple fights, in the midst of the pandemic, but well, like, yeah, you had one fight in the midst of the pandemic, but how's it been just training? Because it's like, I'm here in Massachusetts. I know stuff is starting to open back up, but it's like, during the pandemic, stuff was kind of closed down. So was that the kind of the same case for you over there in Las Vegas?
Yeah, it was. And initially, once everything, I think the week things were getting closed down, we drove back to Idaho to be with family, and there was a gym over there that we could train at, and I had one of my training partners there that we could get some work in because everything here was closed down. I was like, well, I'm not trying to put everything on hold, so we did put some things on hold here, and then drove back to Boise, and we got a little bit of training in, and I was offered a fight right when it was started, right when the pandemic started, which I was like, great, because I'm still in shape. And that fight ended up falling through because, I think the event got canceled, like back-to-back events canceled and everything. So I just couldn't get booked, and I ended up kind of being broke and needing the money in those difficult times with all the pandemic stuff starting. So I ended up working landscaping over there for like 2.5 months or something like that, which I was still trying to train at nights and everything, but man, landscaping takes a lot out of you. So
Yeah.
like half the time I come home and I'm like, I'm going to bed. Like I got to be up bright and early and do the same thing. So I didn't get as much training in towards the end of my time there as I would have liked. Then my cousin Ricky got a fight, so I flew over to Portland and trained with him for the last couple weeks of his camp or so. Went to Florida for the first event back, and he got a win. Great, nice, good dude. Let's get back home. So we went back home. I went back to Boise for a little bit, and then I got offered a fight on like 10 days notice or something. So I flew back to Portland to get a little bit of my own training in, which in retrospect, I wish I would have had a little bit more time. I don't think I was mentally geared as much as I would have liked, or physically geared as much as I would have liked. I remember feeling confident going in there, which was great. I remember feeling like, okay, cool. This is my first time going back to featherweight after being a bantamweight for some odd years. And I had more knockouts at featherweight. I was like, oh, cool. I'll be able to catch somebody. And I remember going in for that fight, and right away I got kicked hard twice in the legs. Like that sucked. I better jump on this guy. So I went to jump forward, and I lunged right into a jab that fractured my orbital in the very first like 15 seconds of the fight. And for the rest of the fight, I was seeing double, seeing two of them. Like that was so frustrating. And there was no crowd, which I kind of thrive on the crowd a little bit. It was just quiet, and I could hear every leg kick landing on me. That was a rough fight. I think Gutierrez had a great performance, and that was kind of I had a glaring hole that was perfect for his type of style. Learned a lot since then though, and since being back in Vegas and training full time at Syndicate now, it's been awesome. Unfortunately, shortly after that fight, I went back to train with my cousin because he was matched up against Brian Kelleher, and my second day training in California with him over at Team Oyama's, I ended up tearing my Achilles. Man. Yeah, full tear. And I was barely getting back into the swing of things because that last fight I had my legs kicked so bad and my eye was so bad that I had to take a month and a half off. So I was barely getting back, and then sure enough, it set me back again.
Yeah, and especially in those times, right? Like you said, it's like you had the fractured orbital bone, like your legs were what's the word? Were hurting after the fight, and then you tear your Achilles. So in that like month and a half of like not training, like do you have to lean on your support system to kind of keep your spirits up, or it's one of those like you kind of have like the mentality, it's like, hey man, it's tough times right now, but things will pass, because I know sometimes support systems are the best thing.
Yeah, definitely, and thankfully. My girlfriend, Shino Van Hoos, she trains as well, and she's a fighter as well. So she understands things and gets things. And I was still going to the gym and watching and everything. I was like, oh, cool. I'll be back soon enough. So I just barely gotten back, and then had the torn Achilles. And I thought it was tested before that. That Achilles tear was one of the hardest things I think I've ever been through for the last, how long was I sidelined? 7 or 8 months or so, something like that, before I could get back to training. That it's my longest time away from from doing something I love. That was a lot of fresh perspective that I had to gain, a new appreciation. That was a fight in and of itself. It was a difficult time for a little bit.
Yeah. On the bright side though, did you get to eat any good food? Any carne
Oh,
asadas, any good stuff like that?
dude, I eat everything. I'm kind of a foodie. Like, well, I shouldn't say foodie because I don't make enough notes of everything that I'm eating that I can really appreciate. But if there's some good food in front of me, especially here in Vegas where there's food everywhere, there's all kinds of good places to try over here. So yeah, we explore, we try some new things. I gain a little weight. You got to get that down.
Yeah. Hey, but you're back in the swing of things, like you said. And like you said, you're training at Syndicate. So like, dude, how's it like training there? Because, Syndicate's making waves. I mean, you got Sasha Polakinov, like, in there, Nathan Levy. I've talked to them before, and like they're savages. So, like you said, how does it feel just training with just complete savages and a team that's on the come up too?
Yeah, it's great, man. I had a little bit of prior experience with Syndicate for my first Bellator fight. I quit a job I was working at back then too, and drove over to Vegas and for like a month and a half and trained with a bunch of the guys over at Syndicate. It was kind of an eye-opening experience. I'd never done something like that. I thought it was kind of risky at the time too, because I had a decent paying job where it's nice being able to pay bills on a regular basis versus trying to figure things out. So it's kind of cool to put myself in that situation. Learned a lot from training with them the first time. I feel grateful that I can be back and be around all these monsters now. I think that team's growing bigger and bigger too. And a lot of those guys are very good. They've all got a great team atmosphere and feel, which I've never really had before. It's kind of been me and another training partner, which is good. I mean, that's great, but being part of a big team is very cool too. They each have their own little perks. Especially being around that high skill level and a bunch of guys that are in the big show and know what it takes to get there, know what it means to stay there. I appreciate just being around them. It's great for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, I mean, like, they're helping me prepare for your fight at UFC 265 in August against Draco Rodriguez. So like you said, it's like, you kind of mentioned it before, right? That you thrive on the full crowd. And without a doubt, this is going to be in front of a sold out full crowd. I'm not sure if they announced the location yet. Have they or no?
No, nothing yet. I know there've been a few things thrown out there, and I think Tapology says one thing and Sherdog says another. On my contract, it says to be determined. So I have zero clue. I'll just try to be as ready as possible and hope that there's a crowd because I do love a crowd. That was some of my favorite moments from like fighting back in Boise on the regional scene. A bunch of my friends and family from my small town would show up and everybody be screaming in support. And I love that. That's just fuel for me. Even when they're booing me, like I just like to hear a bunch of noise and a bunch of people going crazy. It's a spiritual experience, I guess.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, your fingers crossed. I mean, states are opening back up, which, thank God. But and I know definitely be looking forward to that. So my man, just, one last question, just to let you go here. So it's like, the whole topic about dreams has been kind of going on throughout like the whole interview, right? So for you, someone that's like, I know you said you're just scratching the surface, but at the end of the day, you're still at the top in the top promotion in the UFC. Like, what advice would you give, to someone that's following their dreams, right? In whatever field it is, whether it be, like you said, fighting for you, broadcasting, or just anything. Like, what advice would you give them?
I think the thing that works for me, it might work differently for everybody, but I think one common thing that is among the people who are successful, what they want to do is their determination and their openness of finding ways to get after that and grow their own ability in whatever they're pursuing. For me, that's been huge. Like I said, I've kind of always, without even really thinking about it, I just go where I need to go to do what I need to do in order to get where I want to get. Does that make sense? So I think you see that in a lot of people that are successful or high level in what they want to do. It's never this straight line up for success. They've got to zig and zag and do all these things, and they've got to be willing to make some sacrifices and put some things aside that they do enjoy to get where they think they can really enjoy and want to be successful. Sticking with it's been big for me. I mean, there's, especially after a torn Achilles, it's like, man, what do I can't do anything. Like I had to sit around. I had a peg leg that I was walking around with forever, which is fairly demoralizing. And like, it's it's tough times make tough people. And if you want to get to where you want to go, you're going to have to stay tough. You're going to have to be willing to fight to get there. So figuratively for me, or not figuratively, literally for me, figuratively for other people, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well said. So my man, just before you go, you want to drop in your social medias for everyone watching and go and follow you, brother?
Yeah, hell yeah. Instagram, Twitter is going to be the best place to find me at Vendetta135. I prefer when people hit me up on Instagram, actually, just because it's easier to weed through some of that stuff. But yeah, check in, pay attention to what's going on for fight camp. I'm trying to make a big statement and show that I really belong here this next fight. So I appreciate all the support from everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll definitely be looking forward to it. And, once again, appreciate you giving me the time of the day, man. That really means a lot. And, hopefully we can do this soon. But yeah, man. So if anything, like I said, thank you again, as we got the cat in the background. But yeah, so to everyone watching, peace.